Good morning, dear students. Today we will discuss telephone interviews when it comes to survey research. Telephone surveys. Telephone surveys basically are contacting respondents by telephone to gather responses to survey questions. For example, you can start with, good evening, I am from so-and-so company and I am doing this research to know whether all the features of the product are good or not, whether you are comfortable with its pricing or not, when should we launch this new product, something like that, right? So telephonic surveys basically are just like almost like personal interviews. It is just that in personal interviews we are going from door to door and conducting the interviews face to face, whereas in as in telephone surveys we are using telephone services to conduct the interview. It is basically a kind of electronic interaction, you can say. It is not actually human interaction 100%, though a human is involved most of the times in case of telephone surveys. Telephonic surveys can also be of two kind. One is with human interaction and another one is electronic interaction. We will discuss them in detail in upcoming slides just now. Telephonic surveys can be through central location interviewing. It is like, for example, for several decades, telephone interviewing has been a mainstay of commercial survey research. The quality of data obtained by telephone may be comparable to that collected in personal interview. It is almost the same, right? So, and respondents may even be more willing to provide detailed and reliable information on a variety of personal topics over the telephone survey rather than in personal interviews. Sometimes people avoid answering some sensitive questions in case of personal interviews, whereas they reply to such questions in case of telephone surveys because they know that the person is not in front of them to whom they are replying. So they generally do reply. Telephone surveys can provide representative samples of the general population in most industrialized countries. Central location interviewing is basically conducting interviews while sitting at just one center where telephone is kept, and research agencies and interviewing services typically conduct all telephone interviews from a central location. These are generally WATS line, wide area telecommunication services provided by a long distance telephone service at fixed rates, and it allows interviewers to make unlimited telephone calls throughout the entire country or within a specific geographic area. Such interviewing allow firms to hire staff or of professional interviewers and to supervise and control the quality of interviewing more effectively. So it is much better than personal interviews regarding cost as well as in terms of supervision. When telephonic interviews are centralized and computerized, the research becomes even more cost effective. When we supervise them, and it is a kind of criteria that we can tell ourselves that yes, interviews were conducted more professionally, they were good enough. Then second is computer assisted telephone interviewing. These are also possible with the advances in computer technology. This allows responses to telephone interviews to be directly entered into a computer, and the process of entering answers directly to computer is called as computer assisted telephone interview. These are, in this, telephone interviewers would be seated at one place, and a monitor will be displaying all the questions one by one, and it would be even displaying all the possible answers for the respondent, and then respondent can reply with the answer. And what interviewer will be doing, he will just select the answer and feed it to the machine, and when he goes to the next question, that the previous answer is automatically recorded in the system. The same way, all of us has seen or heard about KBC, in which questions are displayed and 4 options are given below that. The interviewer would be reading the question and even reading all the responses. In that case, the thing is, it is displayed on the screen. This and both of them, interviewer as well as the answerer, can see the responses, see the question as well as the answers. But in telephone interviewing, computer assisted telephone interviewing, only the interviewer can see question as well as the answers, and he will be reading out those questions as well as answers to the respondent, and the respondent will reply, and answer would be fed by the interviewer itself. That's the only difference between the KBC and this computer assisted telephone interviewing. Computer assisted telephone interviewing system includes telephone management systems that select telephone numbers, dial numbers automatically, and provide other labor saving functions as well. And sometimes it has a callback scheduling option as well. You can schedule a callback if someone has not attended the call in 1 or 2 attempts. Sometimes respondents say that he's busy, and you can even select the time slot for that particular respondent so as to get a response from that particular respondent. So it is being easier than personal interviews. Then computerized voice activated telephone interviews. These are the interviews which can be conducted with recorded voices. For example, technological advances have combined computerized telephone dialing and voice activated computer messages to allow researchers to conduct telephone interviews without human interaction. When we say that human is not interacting, that doesn't mean that human is not doing anything here. The voice recorded is by a human. The voice was also recorded by a human being, but he is not directly interacting with the respondent. That is why we are saying that it is without human interviewers. However, researchers have found that computerized voice activated telephone interviewing works best with very short and simple questionnaires. When you have ready-made answers, either in, so for example, you have questions who can be replied, whose answers can be in either yes or no, good or bad, right? Those can be conducted with this, because you are just trying to play a recorded voice message, and you can ask respondents to press either 1 or 2, 0 or 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can give them such options. You are not going to ask them to answer the question in a sentence or in words. You will just be asking him to reply in numbers. These can be either in true, false, or in yes, no, good, bad, like, dislike, for, against. These can be done with the help of computerized voice activated telephone interviews. This is how you can collect the directory from anyone, even in any country, and you can start dialing the numbers from the directory automatically through these 3 automated systems: central location interviewing, computer assisted telephone interviewing, and computerized voice activated telephone interviews. Advantages of telephone interviews are, these are speed. Yes, you can achieve highest speed possible in telephone interviews. Speed of data collection is major advantage in telephone interviewing. For example, union officials who wish to survey members' attitudes toward a strike may conduct a telephone survey during the last few days of the bargaining process. Whereas while collecting this data through personal interviews or mails is not actually possible, but hundreds of telephone calls can be conducted typically overnight. Yes, you can do that, right? Then cost. As the cost of personal interviews continues to increase, telephone interviews are becoming relatively inexpensive these days. It involves less than 1/4 of the cost of the total cost of personal interviews in general. However, the typical internet survey is very less expensive than a telephonic surveys, but these are at least better than personal interviews because these surveys has more advantages than internet surveys. Then absence of face-to-face contact. Telephone interviews are more impersonal than face-to-face interviews. Respondents may, answer embarrassing or confidential questions more willingly in a telephone interview than in a personal interview. However, mail surveys, although not perfect, are better media for such serious concerns, but still telephone interviews are better than personal interviews. There is some evidence that people provide information on income and other financial matters only reluctantly, even in telephone interviews. That is another thing, because some topics would always be like little less answered. Even if the form of survey is anything, even if you tell them hundreds times that it would be kept confidential, even if it is a mail survey, internet survey, or anything, they might not answer to some questions, but still telephone survey is much better than personal interviews. Cooperation. In some neighborhoods, people are reluctant to allow a stranger to come inside their homes or even stop on their doorstep. In that case, telephone interviews are better. Sometimes during evening hours, people don't allow anyone at their door, even if they allow the person for the whole day, but still in the evening there is still some more reluctant. In that case also, telephone interviews are better. They can avoid such problems. Willingness to cooperate with telephone interviewing has declined over the years. Earlier, it was recorded as like 40% people respond to telephone interviews. Nowadays, it is just 15%. Sometimes it's 10% as well, right? But still, in case of personal interviews, people generally respond lesser than telephone interviews. This can be overcome by calling people again and again when we face the issue of cooperation in case of telephone interviews. Yes, callbacks. This is again an advantage in case of telephone interviews. An unanswered call or a busy signal or a respondent who is not at home requires a call back, and you can actually call them back at some other day, or maybe some in some another week, or you can decide a time slot different from you are actually using, so as to get a response from the respondent. Then representative sample. It is more representative than personal interviews. If you have random digit dialing, for example, you have 1,000 phone numbers and you want to contact 100 out of them, or maybe 50 out of them, you can put those 1,000 phone numbers just in an Excel sheet, and you can put random digit dialing from those numbers, and that would be a more representative sample than any other kind of survey. Then geographical flexibility. Yes, because you are just doing calls. So geographical flexibility is more than personal interviews. You can conduct any telephone interview. I mean, you can conduct telephone interviews for any geographical location by sitting at one place. But in case of personal interviews, you have to move to that place to conduct the interview. So it is much better, much less. It's cheaper than a personal interview when it comes to geographical locations as well, and it is actually conducted this way. Versatility of questioning is quite excellent here, though it is good in personal interview as well, but it is quite good here as well. Then special feature is fieldwork and supervision of data collection are simplified, and these are quite adaptable to computer technology. Like we have discussed it already, that you can actually supervise the data collection in a better way than to be in personal interviews, because when you are conducting interviews through some computer assisted program, or maybe some voice recorded programs, or maybe you can record telephone calls so as to go back to them and hear it properly, whether the data was collected in a correct manner or not. So the supervision and field work is quite easy in case of telephone interviews rather than personal interviews. And it is really quite adaptable to computer technology. You can find ways to enter that data directly in computer systems through telephone surveys. Then questionnaire length, it should be moderate, because otherwise respondent might feel bored in between and they can just disconnect the call without even telling you. So it should be moderate. Item non-response is medium, because sometimes if you see, it is better than item non-response is better than mail surveys, but it is little less preferable in telephone interviews than personal interviews, because the person might not be interested to answer a question. If you force them more, they might disconnect the call in between. Then possibility of respondent misunderstanding, it's average, because when you are talking to the person face to face, you can see their facial expressions as well, and the respondent also can see the facial expressions of interviewer. So it's quite less possibility of misunderstanding is quite less. But here when it comes to personal interviews, it's more it's more possible that respondent is misunderstood here. But in case of when it is compared with internet surveys, it is better here in case of telephone surveys. Then degree of interviewer influence of answer is also moderate, it's not high, because it's advantage as well as a disadvantage, because you can influence the respondent to answer correctly, and the respondent is not actually looking at you. The respondent cannot see you, so he or she is not influenced with you, the way you dressed or the way you are talking. So they will be replying normally, they will not be getting influenced with you, and the answers would be correct, not the influenced one. Then supervision of interviewers, yes, it's high, especially with center location, WATS interviewing. Then anonymity of respondent, it's moderate, it's at least higher than personal interviews, it's better in telephone surveys. Ease of callback or follow-up, it's very easy, you can call them again and again up to 10-20 times as well. And it's very it's very convenient to call back through when it comes to telephone interviews rather than in personal interviews. Telephone surveys has some disadvantages as well. For example, lack of visual medium. You cannot show the respondents visual aids or something like that while interviewing them, whereas in personal interviews you could use some visual aids, and it was of little more advantageous to make them understand about the questions and make them understand about the whole situation. But in case of telephone interviews, sometimes you might not be able to let them understand the whole purpose correctly. So it's a disadvantage. Then limited duration, like I just discussed in the last slide, that you have to limit the duration or the length of the questionnaire, because if the respondent is bored of answering the question, he or she might disconnect the call in between and might not attend your call again. So it's a kind of disadvantage. So that is why you should always keep your questionnaires quite simple, easy to answer, and you should try to go for telephone interviews with limited duration. Then global considerations. Global considerations, when we talk about, we have some global flexibility that you can go for geographical locations and all that. But when it comes to the language part, yes, we might face some global considerations. Sometimes people are not able to understand your language, but that can be overcome by hiring some professional interviewers who would be willing, who would be comfortable with the language of the respondents. So that can be removed from here. But yes, this is a kind of disadvantage. That's it. Let us discuss some true false. Respondents are typically less willing to answer potentially embarrassing questions in a phone interview than in a face-to-face interview. Is it? Respondents are typically less willing to answer potentially embarrassing questions in a phone interview than in a face-to-face interview. When it comes to phone interview, people are actually more willing to answer. They generally answer potentially embarrassing questions more, or say in a better way than in face-to-face interviews. So it is a false. Second is, computer technology allows responses to telephone interviews to be entered directly into the computer in a process known as direct entry interviewing. Is it? Computer technology allows responses to telephone interviews to be entered directly into the computer in a process known as direct entry interviewing. We have discussed the same method in our previous slides, and the method is computer assisted telephone interviewing. So it is false. It is not direct entry. It is computer assisted interviewing, telephone interviewing. Third is, callbacks are attempts to reconnect individuals selected for the sample who were not available initially. Yes, it's 100% true. So it is a true. Personal interviews are typically less costly per respondent than telephone surveys. Is it? Personal interviews are generally more costly per respondent than telephone surveys. So it is a false. Let us discuss some self-assessment questions. Explain how technology has enhanced telephone interviewing. How technology has enhanced telephone interviewing? We discussed the methods like central location interviewing. You can just sit at one place and call people, and you can respond. You can generate their record telephonically or with the help of some computer system. Computer assisted telephone interviewing, you can take the help of computer, like I just discussed the example of KBC with you, that you can have a computer screen and question and answers would be displayed there, and you just have to select one response as per the respondent, and then answers would be automatically recorded. That is help from technology. Or you can say computerized voice activated telephone interviews is something you can actually record a simple questionnaire and just just dial the number, and the respondent would be listening to the voice and responding accordingly. But this is just the limited questionnaire, because the person can only reply with yes or no, good or bad, true, false, or something like that. But still, at least technology is helping you in telephone interviewing these ways. Second is, discuss the advantages and disadvantages of telephone surveys. You will, in this question, you will just mention what telephone survey is. You will be listing down all the advantages, like I mentioned in the PPT, all the advantages and then all the disadvantages, and you can take one example, and with the help of example also you can explain all the advantages and disadvantages of telephone surveys. You can even do a small comparison of advantages of telephone surveys than in case of personal interviews, or you can exactly in the same way you can do the same comparison in case of disadvantages as well. You can even form a table of personal survey, then telephone surveys and mail surveys, internet surveys, and do the comparison of advantages and disadvantages here. Third is, explain how response rates are determined for surveys and discuss ways to increase response rates for telephone survey. What do you mean by a response rate? Suppose you have made 100 calls and only 40 people responded. And out of those 40 people, 35 people have answered more than 90% of the questions, or you could actually complete 35 questions, 35 questionnaires. Then response rate would be 35 out of 100, not 40 out of 100, because 40 people responded, but you could actually complete questionnaires of 35 people. 5 people either said they don't have time, or they did not reply, or they disconnected the call in between, so they would not be counted as in this response rate. These would be out of response. So 35 people out of 100 responded. That means 35% response rate was recorded. Or sometimes maybe you were able to record 35 questionnaires completely, but one or two questionnaires were like that, they were 80% complete. So you can always mention that 2% people were like they could not answer 100%. That might be due to some language barrier, or maybe some time shortage or something like that. Any reason might be there, but you can always mention so as to improve at least that 2% rate. Then discuss ways to increase response rate for telephone surveys. How can you increase response rate for telephone surveys? For that, you need to check a list why people did not respond. Sometimes it was actually no response. People did not attend the phone call. Why they did not attend the phone call? Sometimes the reason might be they were not at home. So you should call back again and again, right? Sometimes it might be like that you were calling people from 9 to 5, and sometimes 9 to 5 people are not available at home. So you need to change the time of calling. With that, you can improve the response rate. So it depends what kind of the problem was there while this particular telephone survey. Accordingly you can get answers, accordingly you can increase the response rate. So you need to list down the reasons why people did not attend the telephone surveys, and accordingly you can manage the response rate as per their reasons, right? That's it. Thank you.